Hey, Sue, welcome to the Analytic Show podcast. Super excited to have you here finally. How are you doing?
Hi, Jason. Good to catch up. It has been a while and we finally got there. And thanks so much for your patience. And more importantly, giving me the opportunity to talk about something different today.
The pressure is right. And interested to talk about the topic that we are going to be chatting today because it's a bit different to the usual one. But before we get into the heavy topics about data and I want to ask you something about
Yeah.
the yoga and meditation. It looks like you are volunteer. I used to practice yoga for a couple of years and I go like almost like 3 times a week. Big fans of it. Can you
Mhm.
share a little bit about the volunteering in yoga and meditation space?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of this actually started over COVID times where we were all going through something different, trying to navigate this ambiguous, uncertain environment that we've all just had to be, we were all thrown into it in one go. And there's no playbook to tell you how to navigate it. One of the things I started doing at work was through one of our key team events, which was all virtual, it was all online. And one of the questions that came up was, how do you manage the stresses of this uncertainty? And I started talking
Mm,
about meditation. And it was really interesting. There was a lot of interest to want to do some practice around meditation. And it's an interesting piece where you have people who do yoga but don't do meditation, or you have people who do meditation and don't do yoga, or people who do both. And there were a lot of people who were familiar with yoga and have practiced it for years and were really quite avid readers and followers of yoga practices.
mm,
But the meditation bit was, where do I start? Because everyone thinks meditation is just sitting in a quiet space, having a clear headspace and clearing your mind. But
mm,
actually, that's not what meditation is. It is a moment for yourself. It is a
mm,
moment for you to just breathe and find a way to deal with what's surrounding you.
mm,
Because the moment you stop the practice of meditation, your problems are not going to go away. It's just giving you the opportunity to actually manage those challenges around you in a much better way. And so that resonated quite well with the audience I was speaking to at that point in time. And I started running these meditation sessions weekly for my work colleagues.
Oh,
And it
wow.
would be different meditation sessions. It would be meditate on the practice of eating, or a bit of wall meditation, a bit of lake meditation, scenery, objects. It was a bit of everything. But the whole point was to be present in the moment and to acknowledge your space and give respect to that space. And then, of course, there's a lot of books around meditation and how you can own it, how you own your space, and how you build confidence in that space as well. And so that was really a big catalyst for encouraging more people to just meditate in uncertain times. And that's how it came about. I haven't really done it in a while for an audience. I do it for myself. But yeah, I'm definitely keen to pursue that in the future when the opportunity presents itself.
Love it. I did a bit of quite a bit of yoga years ago, but I still found meditation is just so hard.
It is. That's why you need to do meditation, right? So that you can stay disciplined in it.
That that is true. Do you find that meditation has benefited you, like professionally or personally, like in your professional life or personal life?
I think for me, it's benefited me all around. And I think the most important thing for me with meditation has been that it helps me create that moment of clarity. It could be a moment where I'm going through some challenges or someone else around me is going through challenges. And it's just an opportunity for me to release that anxious energy. We talk a lot about energies. And of course, I'm going into a completely different direction to
Mm,
what data and technology is. But we talk a lot about your aura and your energy. And
mm,
people can sense energies that are challenging or energies that are demanding, or probably not necessarily good energies for the other person, for example.
mm,
And when you meditate, you clear that aura, you clear that space because you're asking for more clarity. You're manifesting, in a way, your clarity. It could be a goal, it could just be anxiety that you're trying to relieve. And I felt for me, it definitely helped me relieve a lot of anxious situations.
mm,
And so even when I have a challenging conversation I have to have with someone, for example, we all go through that. I feel like just even 2 minutes of meditation just to clear that air and help me build back a strong aura to manage that confrontation or that conversation has helped me a lot. And it doesn't have to be in a professional space. It could be professional, it could be personal, it could be with family. It just helps you to center yourself, stay grounded, and know that moment is temporary. It will pass, but you just have to manage it in a way that will reduce the anxiety you're having for that moment.
I can relate to that. Now, speaking of volunteering, I know you also do a bit of volunteering about how to do data and how to use data and AI for good. And
Yep.
that is the thing that I actually want to chat with you today. Can I,
Oh, yeah.
for the benefit of the listener, can you share with us the concept of data and AI for good?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of times we are familiar with data and AI having a professional business revenue generating benefit. But even within a professional context, there's a lot of opportunities to drive data and AI for social good. And by that, where the impact is actually positive for society as a whole. We are either creating efficiencies or we're providing value using data and AI to actually enhance societal complexities or societal challenges. And of course, as we go through this conversation, I'm happy to share a few use cases. But one of the things around data and AI for social good is the concept around using that for saving lives. That's a social good. That's positive societal impact. And that can actually change lives. It can help impact lives in a way that we don't usually think about data and AI because we're always thinking of a commercial benefit when it comes to data and AI. Commercial benefits are very important. But just like we have corporate social responsibilities for our broader audience or customers, we have responsibilities to deliver data and AI for societal impacts that can generate positive outcomes.
Let's use that use cases of using the data and AI for saving life and use that use cases to create that narrative and also create that images in the head of the listener so that they understand what exactly that we are getting into and also what are all the things that people have to think about
Yeah.
when it comes to the data and AI.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about a bit around climate. And we all know the common conversation that's taking place around climate change, global warming, and how in the next 50 to 100 years, we're going to be experiencing adverse conditions within our climate. And how do we mitigate that and manage those challenges? So, one of the ways in which you can use data and AI is part of climate change as well as communicating that and educating that back to customers as well as society at large. So we actually use a lot of data and AI to build out those processes, to build out those capabilities. And the societal impact for that is actually it has a lot to do with education and how they absorb that information. Without data and AI, being able to predict what's going to happen over the next year or few months or 50 years from now isn't really possible. So
Mm.
being able to churn through that data can really paint the picture of the reality of climate implications and what we're doing to our environment and how we have to change that. That practice of embedding AI and data into a concept like climate change has great impact from a positive way where we can start to think about our actions. We can start to think about what we're doing to the environment. At the same time, being able to embed those practices also means that we are able to help support lives that may be in danger, lives that may be impacted in a negative way through these climate impact changes. One of the use cases I can give is something I did in a previous role some time ago, where we actually used customer data, so customer interaction data and behavioral data to analyze people were doing with weather or climate based information. And this was a really good use case because it ended up us having to collect a lot of unstructured data from various channels, various data sources, and then plugging that into a system where we could very efficiently and effectively churn through the data and understand customer sentiment. And understanding customer sentiment and feedback was absolutely critical because that information was actually used to enhance and develop products further. So by that, I meant what I'm trying to relate to is Customers are on the ground. They know the problems, they aware of problems in general with any product or service, or even just something like climate change, for example. Their experiences are very valuable. And that ended up generating opportunities to enhance products that could then be used by customers during severe conditions to protect and save them. And that's all data driven. That was all data driven, AI practices, fully automated end to end. And the delivery for the customer was a great product. So, through that particular use case or initiative, there was no revenue generated from this. It was totally for the benefit of the customer to help enhance their lives. And so that's one approach around data for social good, using it for climate change initiatives, but also using that to really save lives.
And if if that's okay, do you mind to share that example how that climate data is being used to enhance that product and what product is that? I think what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to paint a clear picture of a very specific example so that when people listen to it, then they will understand, right? Say if I'm in the manufacturing business, then how I can use this data and use the concept of data and AI for social good, especially in the climate perspective, and how they can use it in their product in the sense. Is that possible if we share, go a little bit deeper by sharing the example? Because I feel
Yeah.
like at the moment we are still a little bit at high level, and I just want to paint a clear picture.
I'll try my best to give as much detail as possible. But one of the examples of using that data is on energy grids.
Mm.
So we think about that from an energy grid perspective, and not everything is a revenue generating return, for example. So if we look at how you use weather conditions to manage supply and demand in energy grids,
Mm.
that's a great way in which we in where that's a great way in the way we push information to energy providers and help them
Mm.
to utilize that information to manage supply and demand. We know severities in weather conditions, for example, it could be extreme heat or extreme cold. Cold can put a lot of pressure on the energy grid and how that supply is managed for residents or commercial businesses. And so that is a really important part of that infrastructure modeling. There's teams of people who run predictive data analysis utilizing weather data, utilizing specific elements of climate change or climate variables to build out their supply and demand structures. Of course, from there, it turns into pricing models. It means you have to price your models a bit differently. It also means that you have to manage customers who are in difficult situations and can't allocate funding towards those pricing models when demand increases and supply is low. But a huge part of how you manage supply and demand is really driven by weather implications and weather factors. So that's one way in which this can really help some areas, whilst, of course, putting pressure on pricing models as well. And we all know energy is a very challenging environment across the world at the moment. It's in huge demand. Our population is growing. And of course, even if there is supply, the pricing model is just changing and it's just going up. Understanding how weather patterns is going to affect that in the future is going to become a huge part of that pricing model, but also how you're going to remediate and support customers who are not in a position to pay for those rising costs. And so AI and data can help mitigate those challenges where customers are not going to be able to absorb those costs. And then, of course, I can go down the path of talking about solar and how we start pushing in that data towards solar, helping people, reducing costs, and encouraging more solar usage.
Absolutely. I love that example, especially I feel like not only is data and AI for social good, but in fact, it could be integrate into the business as well. And what it got me thinking is, I feel like sometimes, and a lot of time when people talk about the using the data, is a bit of a binary thinking in terms
Mm.
of either it's just using the data and AI for the social good and completely, or completely using the data and AI for the businesses, for the revenue. But do you think that is such a binary thinking, or do you think that the organization are like converging those two concepts together?
It's a really good question. I think the fundamentals and the purposes of data and AI is still very unclear. I think it's now become this complex thing where we're dealing with petabytes of information. And 80% of that information was collected in the last few years, not really historically in terms of what we store on our cloud platforms. I think most businesses are still going with the traditional model where data is there to generate a report. And they obviously think of AI potentially as generative AI rather than processes that are meant to automate actions and reduce time that is being spent to do manual processes rather than having efficient and effective processes. So I do think a change is needed, but along with the change, just the way we operate, the way we work needs to change. If of any organization at the moment, that's a massive organization, none of them are going to tell you they don't have legacy. They have a lot of legacy systems. And in order to modernize their platforms, in order to modernize their data practices, they need to actually shift from legacy systems. And this is where the challenge is. And this is where I think organizations are still very traditional in their approach to data and AI. It's if you're trying to apply AI practices, it's because of FOMO. It's not because your organization is actually ready for AI, right? I think, yeah, it's a bit of a challenging one.
Do you have any suggestion to encourage and the organization to practice and utilize and adopt that concept a little bit more, where the data and AI could be a social good, and equally, what is going to be good for the customer and the social good could be equally benefit their company, and perhaps that is a indirect way to encourage more social good.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing at the moment is everyone is seeing AI as this miracle that's going to bring back a lot of money to businesses.
Mm.
But what they're forgetting as part of that model is that there's a huge part around ethics, which ties back to social good. There's a huge part of responsible AI, which can also tie back to social good. And by that, if you're collecting information about the customer and you are trying to build a profile of a customer, I think, first of all, you need to inform the customer what you're really doing with that information, because we're entering a world of complete data breaches, which is no longer a matter of will I get affected by it? It's a matter of if and when you'll get affected by it, right? I am yet to find someone who hasn't been impacted by a data breach. And those who are impacted by data breaches are now struggling either to fill that gap and fix those breaches up. So I go back to what I was saying around ethics and responsible AI. So the moment you start considering practices in data and AI, you need to start thinking about ethics and responsible AI, because that then goes automatically down the path of social good. So it doesn't make sense to me to have practices and data collection if you don't have a governance model, if you don't have a model which actually benefits the customer, not just the organization. At the end of the day, every one of us is a customer, and we all add to the revenue generating opportunity of an organization, but we don't know what our value is. So, what are we getting back for the data that an organization or an environment has about us? That needs to turn into the dialogue of social good. How can you benefit the customer, either from an experiential perspective, from a social responsibility perspective, as well as from a perspective where the customer is benefiting in a valuable way with that data that you have? Similar to that example I provided to you about weather. Again, if I go back to that example, if someone had to take a hike or if they had to go into the bushlands, information provided to them through weather conditions can really help them to assess whether it's a safe situation to be in or not to be in. And that would be information that's collected through their location, their demographic, their interests. All those pieces of information can be a simple push notification that tells them today is not the day you should go bushwalking, for example. That's social good. You're helping a life, you're saving a life. So, in the same way, there needs to be more innovative solutions coming out from organizations that are leveraging data and AI practices to give back to their customer information that they don't know or don't have based on their personal profiles.
I love it. One thing that it comes to my mind is that I think the responsible AI and also the ethical consideration, these are becoming more and more important these days in the world of the AI. I still remember 10 years ago, no one really, literally no one talked about those things. My question for you though is, are they any different when it comes to using data and AI for social good in your experience? Are they any different in terms of the approach of this ethical consideration? Or is it
Um,
the same?
I think they are slightly different. It's not completely the same. I think one of the things we need to consider taking a step back is AI is an outcome. It's not the journey. Data is the journey. So before you start considering the dialogue around I think you need to consider the dialogue of data. What is it that you really have? What are the practices? What are the capabilities you have in place in terms of data before you go down the AI path? Good data leads to good data, AI outcomes. Bad data, of course, leads to bad AI outcomes. And we know all too well some of the horrific cases of AI going rogue, AI being dodgy. We don't want to experience that as organization. That's going to end up causing disrepute. So it's really important to understand what are the goals you're trying to achieve. Is it AI goals, or is it really being able to build out a data capability to achieve AI outcomes?
What about the business plan in securing the funding? That is always the number one issue that everyone has got, i.e., securing the funding. How would
Mm.
you build the business plan and communicate the benefit data and AI for good is good for company as well?
I'd say the first thing comes down to the value prop. What's your value proposition? How do you want your customers to view you and view your services as well? It'll come down ultimately to your brand. So there's a lot of branding that you need to think about. If you want to be seen as an organization with a strong reputation, you care for your customers, you communicate well in times of crisis or times of emergency. For example, data breaches. If something happens in such situations, you've got a good plan of action to communicate that back to your customers. That's obviously related to their data. That is a social responsibility. We all have a responsibility as organizations to communicate with our customers when details or their data has been compromised. So that's one thing. You create good reputation. If we think about some of the data breaches that have taken place in the last 2 years, how many of us have actually achieved good communication outcomes from these organizations to know that we have been impacted by a data breach? Most times we don't know.
Yeah.
And then your data has gone out into the dark web, and then it's compromised even further. So those are some of the implications we need to think about when building out that use case, that having data for social good is actually a social responsibility, just like any other corporate social responsibility initiative that you're running, be it for a charity, be it for an initiative that you're very passionate about, or if it's raising funds. So the funding model really essentially needs to tie back to how are you serving your customer in a socially responsible way? How do we want our customers to envision us, to relate to us, and to see our brand when times of crisis takes place? And the reality is data breaches need to be embedded into every organization's ecosystem. And the reason for that is it's going to happen at some point. It may not happen this year or next year, but at some point, a bad actor is going to enter your cyber system and compromise it. And how are you going to actually deal with the volume of data that gets compromised to your customers? So that becomes, again, an act of social good. AI practices within cyber can be a huge benefit as well. It's a costly measure, but the ultimate outcome of that is so much better for the customer. The old marketing saying, it says it's harder to attract a new customer, it's easier to retain a customer. So you want to keep your current active customers happy, but you also want them to have the validation of trust in you. The fact that they're giving you their identity means that you have a social responsibility to build that trust, that you're securing the identity.
I could imagine that the C-level who is listening to this, they are thinking that we have so much challenges in our organization already, and yet we have to embrace all. Are they going to introduce more challenges to us, to the organization who are working on this AI for social impact? Can you tell us if that is something they have to worry about, and what are some of these key challenges that they may face?
Challenges are huge. It's always going to be there, right?
Mm.
One of the challenges when you start taking on AI, even if it's for social good, is the infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure to actually run these models to manage the data. The reality is, the more data you have, you will require AI modeling. We can't expect human beings to be managing the petabytes of data that's coming out over the year, over the next few years. It's just the volume is too high. So you will need to embed AI practices to automate and to create more efficiency. That you will need to do. That's one challenge. Having the right infrastructure is another challenge. Can you afford the infrastructure to run these models while you collect the data? How is the data collected and stored and secured? How is it managed? That's another challenge. The other challenges you also have to think about is, what is the impact going to be on the energy grid? The reality is, the more data we collect, the more models we run, it is also putting pressure on the global energy grid. And how are we going to support those practices? That's another area to consider. Of course, it's not necessarily every organization's direct challenge, but it'll become a problem in the future as we start to build AI capability out. Another key gap is, how do you ensure that you're hiring the right talent? How do you help to retain the talent you have within your pool? Just because AI is around, it doesn't mean you won't have employees. Someone still needs to maintain the system, build the models, test the models, validate the models. There's all of that still needs to take place, and it actually needs to be done by a human being in this current age. That probably will change in the next few years. But if we look at current state, you still need human beings in that entire pipeline.
So I
Sorry.
would say that we are going to have a business where there is only one person in the company, and it's going to be $1 billion business.
That's possible. I don't see that as not possible. It's coming in the future. That would be an ideal state, right? I don't do any work. I get an AI to do it all. Not sure.
I still find it hard to visualize and relate to that. I think maybe he's talking about having so many AI agents and do all the work. Perhaps we equally have to think about how to make sure the AI agents are ethical as well.
I think my biggest concern is going to be to ensure that AI doesn't go rogue.
I know, right?
How are you going to control that?
Exactly. I think that is probably another challenge that a lot of the people are worried about using the AI. Do you think they have to be extra worried when they are using that AI for social good?
Sorry, what did you mean by that question?
Do you think that they have to be extra worried when they are using the AI for social impact?
I think they should be. I think just because it has a societal positive impact doesn't mean the model shouldn't be validated, right?
Mhm.
There's still going to be biases. How are you going to manage those biases? The model may think it's doing something in the benefit of somebody else, but what if there's an actual bias associated to it? This is not necessarily a direct use case, but if you recall, I think it was in 2016, there was an AI virtual assistant that was released by one of the big tech companies. It was called Tay. And it lasted maybe 2 days at the most, 2 or 3 days at the most, until it was brought down, because the biases weren't trained very well with the AI model. It was just going totally rogue with customers. And that is a way to show that even if you're trying to benefit the customer by making life more efficient for them, which is somewhat of a responsibility, not necessarily a positive societal impact, the fact that AI went rogue meant that something in the practices went wrong.
Mm.
Who didn't do their job that day? The question is, why was the model not validated? Why were the biases not trained into the model to be able to have a better conversation with the customer? So if we start thinking about all of that, even for social good, you have to be absolutely sure that the model that is returning a result is doing it under the right circumstances for the right person.
Mm.
It goes back again to that old saying, right place, right time, right person, right channel. So all of those elements need to be conducive to an AI's ability to respond to a problem or respond in a time of crisis.
Mm. So how can people get involved in social impact initiatives using data and AI? Do you have any suggestion?
Oh, there's so many ways. I think the first bit is to start promoting the opportunity around social impact in your project. So you
Mm.
can do it within your project streams and all the conversations you're having from a business perspective, and how you can actually turn a revenue generating project into a project that's also got societal impact in a positive way. I think that's one way in which you could do it. We need to form more networks. We need to form more groups where we can start to collaborate and talk about these projects so that we can start to help people leverage AI for social good. We don't have enough of that. And specifically in Australia, there's not a lot of work being done in that space. And that's something I'm trying to drive, which is the whole reason I am so passionate about this topic, because I believe in people and I believe there's a way to help people with the enhanced technology and data initiatives that we have. And so I feel the best way to start is in the education space. Let's start providing practices and education on social good. How can we leverage all these enhanced capabilities we have today that we didn't have a few years ago to really drive social initiatives in healthcare, in NDIS, in practices around education? How do we help people better their lives, not replace their abilities, but better their lives using social good? And one of the key areas I see a great opportunity is really in healthcare. There's as much as there's fantastic work taking place in healthcare, there's also a lot of limitations in just the administration of healthcare. I recently heard a new segment talking about patients who need elective care, and instead of waiting 30 days for major surgery, they're waiting over a year.
Yeah.
It would be great if we could start to use AI models from a socially impactful perspective to help patient care, to help support patient care. So those are the sorts of things we need to start thinking about. Is a plethora of use cases we can start to talk about, which will take up all the time in this podcast, but we can start looking at different industries. I firmly believe every industry has an opportunity to advocate and drive data and AI for social good.
Are there any specific skills needed for the people who are doing this? Are they different to the typical your data AI project?
I think every project, be it for social good or not, has the typical generic skills we know.
Mm.
What I do think we do need is diversified mindset. And those diversified mindsets is around the soft and hard skills, but also the continuous learning skills. Being able to drive those models that you create to benefit social impact. So that's the kind of mindsets we need. We need a diversified mindset. You're going to need the traditional programming, coding, as well as modeling and validating and testing skills that won't change, but your purpose will. Why are you building this model? So you really have to think about, how am I going to use this model to benefit someone or benefit an industry? That is what's going to change. That dialogue is going to change. Whereas within a profit making context, we're always looking at, how can I generate more revenue by 10% more than last year, for
Mm.
example. Whereas here, that objective is going to change. The objective is going to be, based on this data, who will benefit from this data in a positively impactful way? And that's what I would say is different to the traditional data modeling capability.
I love it. I love it. I feel I have learned so much more about this whole idea about the AI for social impact. I just think that sometimes the business may be doing some of it already, but perhaps they are just not talking about it enough.
Correct.
I know that's certainly one thing in my business as well that we just don't talk about it is BAU. So thank you so much for that. So now, before
Absolute
we
pleasure.
wrap up this podcast interview, I do have two final questions for you.
Awesome.
First one is, what is your most important first principle?
My first principle is the first step. It always comes down to taking the first step. I think
Mm.
we all live in a lot of fear around the outcome and what the destination would look like or should look like. But I feel in order to get there, wherever your destination, it just takes the first step.
I love it. What is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
I read this book maybe about 5 to 6 years ago, but I think there's so many great themes in it. Not exactly a happy story, but it has a very enduring outcome. It's a book called Will to Live by Matthew Ames. He has such a great story to live by, but also a great story to tell. And I think everyone should take some time just to read a bit about his biography, also his journey and what he's experienced in his life. But more importantly, it's that key word, will. We need to have the will to endure. We need to have the will to pursue, and it doesn't come without challenges. So I'm not going to give a lot of the book away, but I really do think if you really are going through challenges in life, or you're trying to overcome some challenges, that book is very inspirational.
Really.
So I'd love, I would love everyone to read that. And I wish I read it when I was younger. But now that I have, it's definitely given me a lot more confidence.
Who is Matthew Ames, by the way? Do you want to give a
Um,
second to tell us who he?
Yeah, so Matthew Ames, he's based in Australia, I think. Yeah, he's an Australian and it's interesting. He's just like us, a person who has a family, who had a life working in the corporate world, but unfortunately, due to an illness that he was ignoring, he had symptoms of this illness and he was ignoring it for some time. Eventually that got the better of him. It made him a quadruple amputee within a matter of days, difficult decisions that his family had to make. So yeah, so he was a citizen just like you and me who went through this really challenging period in his life. And he went from this strong, independent, I could do a lot of things person to becoming a complete dependent on someone else. But obviously the story is very much about how his family has stuck by him and supported him. But then at the same time, how he tried to change his mindset in the way he approaches his life and the way he's actually tackling these challenges. So it's been a good while since he's been faced with this severity. Obviously, through motivational speaking and sharing his own story, he's empowered a lot of people. And of course, the book itself is a great read. On that, it's definitely a tearjerker. If you're sensitive to these sorts of situations, you will cry when you read the book because it really pulls at your heartstrings. But I do feel so many themes in there are so applicable to challenges that we face, personal challenges that we face in different shapes and forms. And we can't compare that with each other. But it's just a way to motivate you on overcoming those challenges. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away on the book, but hopefully that is something that resonates with the audience.
I think it will. Once again, thank you so much, Sue. Love talking with you and I look forward to hearing from you and having you back on the podcast again. And thank you so much once again for sharing this whole concept of AI for social impact.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks again. And great channel for me to talk a bit more about topics I'm passionate about. So appreciate your time and putting all of this together. And I hope your audience enjoys this episode. Thanks
I
again.
think they will. Thank you.